This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
This second part of the first Star Wars trilogy has a truly epic dimension, adding a mature philosophical aspect to the non-stop barrage of brilliant special effects. The much-loved characters are developed in intriguing ways. The imagery of Lucas's vibrant, futuristic fairy tale is darkened, giving this sequel a cynical, harder edge that lifts it above the serial roots of its predecessor.
1, 2, 3. Despite requests from fans, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order didn't get any DLC, but the 4-year gap before its sequel was bridged with a novel, Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars, written by Sam Maggs of BioWare and Insomniac fame. Today was going to be a good day, the book opens. Jedi Knight Cal Kestis was going to make certain of that. You can be forgiven if Battle Scars' existence comes as a surprise to you. It's a light, breezy tale that documents a low-stakes adventure for Cal and the crew of the Mantis. Merrin gets some lovely character work, the team hunt for an ancient artifact, and Cal spends 50% of the book balancing. Balancing on one knee, Cal threw out an arm and helped the droid. With speed and balance most beings wouldn't have access to. His other hand hitting the ground in front of him to maintain his balance, Cal hit the ground hard, rolling to keep his balance. Balancing on the shoulders of the jetpack wearing they always work well together, striking a fine balance. That's a weird thing for me to pick up on, I know, but balance is something I don't think the first game, Jedi Fallen Order, managed to pull off. The creative director, Stig Asmussen, went on the record that he didn't want Fallen Order to, quote, give the impression that we're just some climbing around Lara Croft game. That's not what we are. Before showing an extended piece of gameplay where that's mainly what the player was doing. Fallen Order was a great game with endearing characters, but had gameplay that was held back by what felt like uncertainty, unable to find a clear identity. In hindsight, my critique of that game left a lot to be desired, and even made some of you think I hated it, which isn't true, but I stand by my claim that different inspirations from Uncharted to Souls-likes to Metroidvanias crashed into each other rather than blended. And it was saved by some admittedly awe-inspiring adoration for the Star Wars mythos that lets the player see past its flaws. And then in 2023, we got Jedi Survivor. And Jedi Survivor is doing its damnedest to find that balance. Of course, when I say that, I don't mean it from a performance point of view, and I've got to flag that right off the bat. I've got a lot of nice things to say about Survivor, but no matter what you played it on, it did not release in a state worthy of $60. Crashes and bugs that would make Starfield look polished, a frame rate that was so anarchic that it forced me to take extended breaks for the sake of my eyes. In almost every measurable way, Jedi Survivor surpasses its predecessor. Except here. And any time I praise the grandeur of its scope or its swashbuckling ideals, I feel like I should put a little ticker at the bottom of the screen that says, "Yo EA, give devs more time to finish their games, you greedy spam of fuck." But I'm not going to do that, because the bugs have been well documented, and I love so much about the game's intentions and what it tries to do. Intention matters to me. A lot. When a game is padded out with garbage loot systems and designed entirely to weed out player engagement, I hit a point where I stop trying to find the good and can only see the cynical, corporate bad. But when a game like Jedi Survivor comes out that is so goddamn earnest and wanting the player to fall in love with its world, writing, characters and gameplay, I find it very easy to look past bugging frame rates and whatever the hell is happening here, and instead see the magic and hard work that binds it all together. In the halls of gaming history, I believe Survivor will rightfully be punished for the state it released in. But once you move past that criticism, what you get is a game that almost brings balance to the Force. And I mean that in more ways than one. So, grab your Kyber Crystal, rip off your poncho, and prepare for full spoilers ahead. This is a commentary and critique of Star Wars Jedi Survivor.
Even the genuinely fun elements of the first film, its comic strip eclecticism, its movie serial dash and narrative tropes, are pedantically filled out and institutionalized, much as the galactic landscape is by effects technology.
Let's start with the question. What's the hook of Survivor's first hour? By minute 20 of Jedi Fallen Order, we've seen our friendly rustic pal Prof be stabbed through the chest by the second sister. The gameplay associated with that opening is tedious, given over to lengthy climbing without exploration or lightsabers, but as far as the story goes, boom, revenge. There's our hook. By minute 20 of Jedi Survivor, we've got one up on the sleazy Senator Sajan and kicked a lot of ass, but in the grand scheme of the game, none of this matters to the overarching plot. No, instead the focus of Survivor's opening is purely on characterization and vibes.
Sarah's on lockdown. State your business.
Sean.
Believe the rumors. A Jedi.
Cal Kestis has been captured by the Coruscant security force. Bound and chained, he's marched through the planetary city for questioning. It's quite a while until he says a single word, so the player is encouraged to wonder just how he got into this situation and why exactly he seems so confident. When last we saw him, he was setting off on more adventures with Grease, Seer, BD-1 and Merrin, but curiously none of them are here, not even our droid mascot. That curiosity about the breakup of the Mantis crew will come from players who played that first game. There's a lovely optional recap for newcomers to the series, but without that emotional investment, I'd argue there is no story hook for us to cling to until hour 4 or 5, when the mysterious planet of Tanalorr becomes a plot point. That's not necessarily a bad thing. This is simply part 2 of the story, a continuation of Cal's journey through the galaxy. You can jump into Survivor and have a good time, but this isn't a story that's written as a jumping on point. Instead, Cal's march through Coruscant is all about setting up character and tone, and it does so indulgently, welcoming the player back to the Star Wars of it all. The colour palette is cold, brooding, cut through by technological opulence that doesn't leave any room for the Force. The Empire's grip is on full display, with stormtroopers harassing the locals, and once we start battling through the level, there are so many enemies that it borders on harassment. Cal is a wanted man, and the Empire has become unstoppable. Seeing how oppressive this is makes us understand just why a place of refuge will become so attractive later. The fact Coruscant doesn't have anything to do with Dagan Gera or even Tanalorr is perfectly fine, because all of this is framed like an adventure of the week.
Terrorist.
You gonna let him call you that?
Cal running around, fighting stormtroopers and taking on Senator Sajan feels like watching Spider-Man web up a mugger as he swings on to the main plot, and I mean that as a major compliment. It's a whirlwind of combat, platforming and characters that tutorializes everything we need to know to start making the most of Survivor's freedom-oriented design philosophy. The first real gameplay we get is a combat gauntlet to flex Cal's muscles and feel empowered when facing down some basic bitch stormtroopers, and then it's a lovely, varied dash through Coruscant's awe-inspiring neon wonderscape. We can experiment with platforming. The set design is lathered in fun details like a wanted poster for Cage, a bounty hunter we'll later meet. Locked doors and gates make it very clear that we'll be able to come back later and unearth some juicy secrets. A monster breaking through a barrier, laser shields, and there's practically no downtime. In hindsight, I actually think the structure of Survivor elevates the structure of Fallen Order, where the first game was slow to the point of condescension, flagging the mundanity of Cal's life in hiding before the adventure begins. Survivor contrasts that with this explosion of action and emphasis on fighting, because that's all Cal knows now. His confidence flips into cockiness when it's revealed that he was never captured and summons BD-1 to crash the Center's yacht, only for it to be too violent and completely backfire. The security force who arrested him are his new crew, a team that he's embarked on missions with since Grease, Merrin and Seer went their separate ways. He's gone from Padawan to a destructive Jedi Knight in the gap between games, always focused on the mission, on fighting the bad guys, and something about his demeanour tells us that this has evolved from a noble cause to an obsession. It's important to remember that as far as Cal is concerned, he is the last Jedi laying siege against the Empire. He doesn't know about Luke, he doesn't know about Ezra. Ahsoka Tano isn't even a whisper in the wind to him, and while Coruscant doesn't tell us what's happened to Seer, we'll eventually learn that she's stopped fighting. He thinks he's a lone hero in a deadly galaxy. Cameron Monaghan, Cal's actor, explored this further in an interview with IGN. Quote, "Cal's more rugged. He's kind of been weathered by time and situation. He's still a pretty young man, but I actually think he would look a bit older than what he actually is because he's been through a lot. He's still a young soul, but there's a weight beyond his years." I love that word, weathered. Someone's gotta fight the good fight, but we pick up that Cal's defined by his pain, by the loss and grief he's experienced. His war against the Empire is turning into a vendetta that's isolating him from any chance of happiness, but he's blind to it. And the main way this is shown to us is through quipping.
What took you so long?
Oh, you know, just hanging out, taking in the sights. Been a while since I was on Coruscant. Thanks, bud.
Part of the job, Kestis.
The cool factor is strong. Every member of our new team, from the icy Bravo to the fiery Gabs and the hungry twins is hard-boiled with a side of banter. We pick up that Cal met them through various bouts of violence. Gabs used to work for the Syndicate. The twins helped him out in a cantina fight, and it's all a direct contrast from the inserting gang of outcasts and screw-ups that made up the Mantis. He's comfortable with them, and it shows how much he's evolved from the scrapper that arched an eyebrow at Grease's gambling debt in the first game. Saying that, it is a shame that these relationships are so short-lived. I don't mind the time jump, that's pretty standard Star Wars fare, just look at how Empire and Return of the Jedi open, but the Coruscant crew feel like a group that might have had more to give. That DLC episode we never got would have been the perfect place to embed their legacy in this universe. But then again, if we got that, then the mystery of the Mantis breakup wouldn't be there to hook us in.
What about you, new guy? You in this for the credits?
Credits never hurt. But, I have a daughter. Kata. I don't get to see her as often as I'd like, but at least I can provide for her.
The primary reason our new team take a back seat is because Survivor is working at pace to make us like Bode Akuna, the newest member of our band of mercenaries. We learn he's got his own score to settle with the Empire. They killed his wife, so he's dedicated to improving the life of his daughter Kata at any cost. He tells us that this is just another job. As long as the pay's good and we're sticking it to the Empire, that's all he cares about. But he's strikingly perceptive and lays it on thick with the compliments.
Okay, you can fight.
Yeah, you too.
I don't speak binary, but I hear you, BD. Team effort.
Look, if there's any way to make me like an escort character, it's having them suck my dick. The levity of our Coruscant heist lasts for a while before everything goes to hell, and the majority of that time is spent with Bode in tow. He doesn't just compliment us, he's also an asset while getting around, in combat, and even proves himself as a key strategist when he flags weak points to target during skirmishes. The game is desperate for us to like him, and while I can't fault any of these tactics, it kind of feels like too much, right? I'll talk more about how Bode's twist is handled when we get there, but alarm bells were already ringing for me because of how dedicated Survivor's opening is to making him lovable. This guy comes out of the ether as a crucial character from day dot, and despite being new to Cal and new to the player, he's just a tad too overfamiliar. To be frank, this all feels purposeful, especially on a second playthrough, but the fact it put me on edge is worth acknowledging. What's also worth acknowledging is that our first mission is a cataclysmic failure.
What took you so long? While you've been chasing shadows, I have been...
Finding the military codes is disheartening to Cal. He sees that all of his work, all of his sabotage, all of his fighting has barely made a dent in the Empire's expansion. Senator Sajan is assassinated, so he doesn't even get to stand for his crimes. The Mantis gets shot to hell, and with the exception of Bode, the entirety of our new team are murdered by the time we leave the planet. This mission was commissioned off-screen by Saw Gerrera, but it's implied that Cal set it up, planned it, and led it, meaning this is his failure, another lash to weather him. However, as for an opening that gets the player invested, I think it overflows with successes. The careful balance of action, traversal, and exploration is the main driver, but bringing back the Ninth Sister is where I think it really shines, with a single exception. Committing to the theme, she's simmering with obsession, just like Cal is, and just like Dagan Gera eventually will. She's out for revenge after we kicked her ass back in Fallen Order, and after she kills his friends, Cal throws himself after her blindly, pent up on adrenaline, and it highlights to us the sort of warrior he's grown into, capable, but unable to slow down and really think about his next move. She's also a quality boss fight. 2 phases force us to learn how to parry and dodge rhythmically in a way mob enemies wouldn't be able to teach, and more importantly, she's a proving ground for us to see just how much Cal has grown. She was a tricky fight in Fallen Order, now she's barely a tutorial, but the way Survivor uses boss fights is a good example of how it hasn't entirely learned its lessons from its predecessor. I did say it almost finds its balance. For a start, the boss battle is cut short. Once you get her down to about a third health, Cal defeats her in a cutscene, which feels strange because this isn't something that happens again after the fact. I know this is a very personal nitpick, but god I wish the game would let us enjoy the fight to the end, getting her health to 0. It wasn't as much of an issue in Fallen Order because Cal didn't defeat the second sister in their first confrontation. Almost every time it happens in a game, I think it undermines the sense of success a player should get from beating a boss. Why even have a health bar if it's not an accurate measure of your progress through a fight? And second, The Ninth Sister technically isn't our first boss battle, but if you're watching this video after beating the game, you might be confused. For the sake of doubt, let me reintroduce you to K405, a security droid with a boss title and health bar sitting snugly at the top of the screen for reasons. This is a regular enemy. Its health pool hasn't increased and its attacks don't do more damage. There's nothing that separates it from every other security droid we'll bump into later on. It's something Survivor is distinctly guilty of. It keeps pretending a boss fight is happening when all that's changed is a name splashed at the top. In the main campaign, there are only 6 bosses that I think earn the name. The Ninth Sister, Ravis, Dagan Gera, Darth Vader, Bode, and the game's ultimate challenge, Rick the Door Technician. But for every Ravis or Rick, there's a sea of regular grunts and beasties popping up between them to give the illusion of more.
Your name was Masana Tide. Time to set you free.
The closing beats of the Ninth Sister's fight gives us a moment of calm before the storm of Cal's escape. He reminds her of her name, her true name, pulling her back to the light side of the Force. For a split second, it looks like he's going to talk her down, but then he chooses to put her out of her misery. It's framed as a mercy kill, but the message is clear. This is a colder, harsher Cal, focusing on violence rather than peace. And when he reunites with what's left of his team, Bravo furthers that message. Finish the mission, he says. That's how we honor the fallen. Cal takes this as justification for his new outlook, but is this all that matters? Is it the fight and nothing else? Despite the grimness and tragedy that envelopes the first level, there's a distinct feeling that Respawn are still having fun with the Star Wars bits. The escape from Coruscant is a dynamic, flashy cutscene as Cal, Bode, and Bravo fight Empire ships. Bravo is killed, and the shrapnel of his ship literally coats the Mantis. Cal may have escaped Coruscant with his life, but the explosiveness of the mission he planned has ended with him covered in the remains of his friend. It's brutal, and worst of all, he doesn't take much of a moment to mourn those he's lost. A quick glance at a picture, and then back to the mission. He's running like a man out of time. But whether he likes it or not, we're going to force our boy to slow down as we head off to Kobo, because I want to talk about Survivor's addictive world design, and there is a lot to say. But first, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, who've been kind enough to sponsor my last few videos of the year. There's a good chance you already know this, but they're the lead web design platform on the internet. If you're looking to start a business, offer freelance work, or just want to create an artist's portfolio to show off, I cannot recommend them enough. I bit the bullet and created a website myself, and now I have a professional environment to impress my mom and dad with when they tell me this YouTube thing is a waste of time. The best thing about Squarespace is how easy it is to use. Start with a flexible designer template or build your own, then customize to fit your style and professional needs using their drag and drop website builder. Whipping up the first draft of my site took me barely a couple of hours, and there's all sorts of new toys to play with, such as scheduling and calendar integrations if your work is appointment based, or full galleries to showcase your work. If you want to give it a shot yourself, just click the link below to start your free trial, and if you want to keep at it, you can get 10% off through the code MontyXander. Thanks again to Squarespace, and back to the video.
Confession. When I went to see The Empire Strikes Back, I found myself glancing at my watch almost as often as I did when I was sitting through the truly terrible movie called The Island. The Force is with us indeed, and a lot of it is hot air.
There is a moment at about the halfway point of the game where Cal can go off the beaten path and find a Force Echo sitting innocently near some tar pits. If we interact with it, we hear some screams of terror. A black, goopy monstrosity has scared the locals. Seconds later, a bogling, a creature from the previous game, pops out of the ground covered from head to toe with tar, innocently looking for pets. The boglings have migrated to Kobo and are disrupting its ecosystem. Stuff like this, the little moments like this, is why I love Survivor's world design. Respawn's love for Star Wars was always there in Fallen Order, but through dint of being a sequel, Survivor has more original material to pull from. It's like Respawn are falling in love with their own additions to the Star Wars universe, and with Survivor, they're confidently planting their flag in ground that's distinctly theirs.
It was all just a misunderstanding!
let him go.
Nowhere is that more obvious than this little froggy fud Turgle. He's taken the fanbase by storm, even inspiring his own hashtag. Happy Turgle Tuesday, everyone. He's a pretty inconsequential character. He gives out a side quest, serves as an introduction to one of our baddies, Ravis, but Survivor finds ways to weave him into the game more and more, and he's a microcosm of how full the game world feels as a result. Out in the open world, we can find his shell, an environmental detail that isn't needed, but makes him feel more included in the wider whole. Various force echoes trace him wriggling out of interrogations with raiders. His existence interweaves with the politics of a few of our side characters. Doma, the de facto mayor of the town Rambler's Reach, has taken pity on him and is protecting him from raiders, much to the chagrin of townsfolk like Mosey or Zig. Cal lands on Kobo, hoping that his old friend Grease Dritus can fix up the Mantis so we can get back to the fight. Since leaving the Mantis crew, Grease has set up his own cantina, Pyloon's Saloon, named after his great-grandmother, showcasing the importance he puts on family. Unfortunately for Grease, the ruthless Bedlam raiders are causing trouble and harassing his customers. The raiders are cultishly devoted to a Gendai by the name of Ravis. He finds Cal amusing. This is a pleasant blast from the past for him. He has fond memories of long, glorious battles against Jedi Knights, and in keeping with our theme of destructive obsession, he's determined to see if maybe, just maybe, Cal will finally be the one to give him a warrior's death. Even though Ravis and his Bedlam raiders are smeared across Kobo like the drool of the Huttese, the planet is a joy to explore, and the way the galaxy has been conceptualized makes Survivor feel grander in scope, handcrafted and satisfying to uncover. Despite how big the game is, there's a shocking level of restraint for the sake of inspiring curiosity and enticing exploration. We will never meet a Rancor in the main story. You can only find them while hopping, climbing and running around. Because Survivor doesn't desperately front-load itself with all of its cool bits, a player gets conditioned to wonder what else might be out there if they take the time to explore. It's not dissimilar to how God of War Ragnarok treated The Crater, an entirely optional secret map with boss fights, goodies and lore tidbits that some players won't even know existed. There's no secret this grand in scale in Survivor, but the philosophy's pretty consistent. At launch, Stig Asmussen said that he still hadn't seen everything in Survivor because the designers were encouraged to riddle it with their own personal flourishes. Even though it would make story sense, Respawn have managed to hold off on dotting its landscape with copy-pasted bandit camps in favour of minor challenges, puzzles and enemy skirmishes that feel more curated. Instead of 50 bandit camps, there's just one, and it's a sizable structure full of droids to slice, an NPC to chat to, and the son of Satan himself, Spawn of Ogdo. Because Fort Kalin is the only bandit camp we'll find, it feels more monumental when we eventually conquer it, and just like the Rancors, it's entirely optional. The world design teases the player. This is mainly through dint of its Metroidvania mechanics. This style of game lends itself to winking at us that there's something cool here that you'll need to come back to later. It's what makes them so addictive. But there are tactics in place to keep up our wonderment. Very early in the Kobo map, the player might just trip into this chamber. Vishton Wolf, a Bedlam Raider lieutenant, is hiding behind this big, ominous room, and he mocks Cal as he enters. If we come back later with BD1's shock charge, we can open a chest, get some cool cosmetics, and a mini-boss to boot. Why is this memorable?
Hiding behind that door?
Hiding? No, just observing. That's what I do. Watch and wait.
Well, I can't wait to kill this guy. Even finding chests, a meditative part of the first game, now have a couple of unique interactions associated with them. Like here, where we find Gara, a youngster that wants to run off and join the raiders. She's sitting on the chest we want to open, and Cal needs to use a Jedi mind trick to talk her out of the decision. On Jeddah, there's a crypt puzzle that's unlike anything else in the game, where we need to use an environmental clue to solve it, leading to a shortcut and some swanky new gear. You are finding upgrades, collectibles, and secrets at a rate of 1 every 90 seconds, but despite the map I just showed you, much of this stuff isn't littered aimlessly. They require meticulous thought, puzzle solving, platforming and engagement with the Metroidvania mechanics. Mathematically, the landmass of our planets isn't that big. For example, if Kobo was all flat, you could run from one end to the other in less than 5 minutes, but Respawn have concentrated their efforts on density and variety. This isn't unique to Kobo. In fact, it's a through line we see on Coruscant, the Shattered Moon, the ISB base on Nova Garen, and Jeddah. Mountains to scale, cave networks full of mini-bosses that loop back in on themselves, facilities with long drops that we need to carefully clamber through, wide chasms where we need to use wind streams to gain height, ancient temples and ruins where grappling and wall running is necessary. There's a variety of not just architecture and animal life, but plant life and sentient life as well. Zooming out, each planet has an identifying gameplay gimmick that makes them feel unique. This isn't like Fallen Order, where each planet felt like the same design philosophy had some sexy lipstick to differentiate it. Coruscant is an array of floating platforms with perilous heights. The Shattered Moon has claustrophobic tunnels and security systems to defend against. Jeddah has flat, deadly sand with Skrytons hiding underneath. And Kobo is like 5 different planets wrapped up in one. The basalt forest feels immediately different from the grassy plains we saw before, with unique fauna, gushing waterfalls and rock structures. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, all of the environments are breathtaking. The Star Wars vistas are still here to make us stop and drink it all in, but the smaller moments, the quieter moments, are where my awe was inspired. The way you open doors in the Jedi Temple is anything but standard, where you use the Force to roll balls into sockets. The ruins that we pull out of the cliffs to block the wind form a strange alien humming soundscape. The plant shelf in the Mantis has been replaced by a memoriam for Cal. Old pieces of junk from our previous adventures remind us of simpler times. The Pilgrim's Path gives us collectible snippets of 2 Jedi pilgrims who lost everything and found each other in the desert, seeking solace in the Anchorite ruins. Onwards, traveller, they tell us. Find stillness along the path. Even in the Force Echoes and BD1 scans, story details that are incentivized because they give us XP, the game is telling us though this journey will carry Cal forwards, direction will only be found if he takes stock of where he is. And speaking of taking stock,
I wish things were different, but you keep losing people. And you yourself said that the Empire's growing stronger every day. Now maybe it's time for you to be something more than a lightsaber.
Reuniting with Grease, Cal makes it clear this is just a pit stop. He wants to get the Mantis fixed and get moving ASAP, but Grease asks him sincerely to slow down, take a break. The galaxy can wait a couple of hours. He's prepped to spare room for people to stay, and there's even a meditation point carved out for Cal, a quieter moment that filled me with awe without the E. Aw. There's a flash of hot anger in Cal's eyes, a sense of betrayal when Grease asks him to take a moment. We still don't know exactly what happened, but it's implied that Cal's ferociousness, his eager to always be fighting, burnt out his friends. The breakup of the gang is disappointing to see for longtime fans, so it's a solid plot beat to keep us invested while the story bubbles along. It's a little aimless, but that's just like Cal, and while Survivor's structure will infringe its story later on, it works here because it puts us into his headspace. We're just like him, looking for the hook. Looking for the next big mission. Grease can't give us that, but what he can give us is a job. There's some smuggler tunnels under his cantina and he says he's got a pest problem. Let's see what secrets and collectibles are deep below Kobo. The way the game handles those secrets isn't all smiles. Legendary enemies sit behind locked doors or wait for us to backtrack, and aside from a boss health bar at the top, they don't offer any dynamism or spectacle that makes them worth uncovering. Again, it's that problem where the game pretends a regular enemy is a boss fight, and I hope the trend dies when we eventually get the 3rd title. Ooh, a vile bile maw? What's vile about it? Oh, nothing at all? Great! The map, a contentious part of Fallen Order that I personally didn't mind, is generally much clearer because the world design is more expansive, but it's also rooted in oversights. As you explore, Cal will eventually unlock map icons for chests and resources so you can track your collectathon, but those icons don't show up on the fast travel map, meaning you need to do this dumb little dance every time you're going after specific chests where you hop between BD1, find your place, and then remember the closest waypoint once you reach a meditation point. Seer's base has oddities on the map until Darth Vader eventually trashes the place. Chests that don't exist, quest markers that don't go anywhere, which only serves to confuse us until the big twist. And then there's this. Do you see this? This is my map on New Game Plus. Do not save collectible hunting for New Game Plus. I've already collected almost all of this on my first playthrough, but they show up on my map in droves, little white markers, only disappearing when I eventually find the empty box or collected secret. This is frustrating because I had only a small handful of chests and priorite to nab on my second run of the game, but I don't know which icons are old stuff I already found or new stuff I hadn't gotten around to yet.
Is your name Z?
Yes, it is. How do you... Oh, no! I'm trapped.
It took us a while, but here we go. Our hook, teased into submission over 3 hours and summoning a quest to find the MacGuffin just like Fallen Order did. Deep in Kobo, Cal meets an old Republic droid by the name of Z, and as he frees her, we get a flashback to the glory days of the Jedi Order. A Jedi Knight, Santari Khri, wiped Z's memory of a planet, Tanalorr, an old lost world. If it's habitable, it could be a place of safety for the victims of the Empire. The next stop is Kobo's forest array to learn more, which means puzzles and climbing. Where Fallen Order ripped Cal's lightsaber off him for 3 lengthy sections, Survivor's campaign never does that. It places a lot more emphasis on combat and a lot less emphasis on long-winded puzzles and temples. In fact, we can quantify this with a side-by-side comparison. Both the Forest Array in Survivor and the Temple of Eelram in Fallen Order happen around the same point in each game. With the Temple, our time is given over to 4 instances of combat, 6 instances of platforming or climbing, and 5 puzzles. Out of the 3, combat fell severed off, shoved in for variance. But if we look at the Forest Array, we'll see a very different split. Here, there's only 4 instances of platforming compared to 8 fights and 3 puzzles. Despite Survivor's overall focus on exploration, we're simply battling more than we ever did in Fallen Order. And because of where enemies are positioned, a lot of our platforming is given over to repositioning Cal while he's in danger. You might prefer Fallen Order's segregated focus, and that's totally fine if you did, but Survivor's approach is much more up my spaceport, because swinging a lightsaber is far cooler than pushing up on the analog stick. The puzzles are also short and sweet. No more pushing a ball and hoping it rolls the right way, and they don't feel siphoned off to their own little corners because they're factored into general exploration and secret areas. Particularly, burning away or blowing up black rock leads to some unexpected surprises, so we can trace a synergy between the puzzly bits and the whimsical explory bits. If you want full-blown puzzle rooms, they're available in the Jedi temples, but none of this is mandatory.
It was my discovery, my home, and they just expected me to throw it away?
Dagon, wait.
I refused to obey and was betrayed by the one I trusted most. No, stop!
At the top of the Forest Array, we find Dagon Gera, Jedi Knight of the High Republic. He's been stuck in this bacta-tank with a missing arm for almost 200 years. He discovered Tanalorr first and showed it to Santari Khri. A paradise, a new world, a place where Dagon wanted to establish a Jedi temple, but to do that he needed to petition the Jedi Council, and his efforts were interrupted when a marauder group called the Nile attacked. Dagon's power burbles through the scene before he's even released from the bacta-tank. Cal's psychometry, his ability to tap into lucid visions of the past, is interrupted when Dagon sees him. His aggressiveness should be the first sign that releasing him from the tank is a bad idea, but instead Cal is relieved. He's found an old Jedi Knight. Clearly, he thinks Dagon might be strong enough to help him take on the Empire. His crusade clouds his judgment, and he unleashes Dagon onto the galaxy. The old knight bleeds his kyber crystal, a gold lightsaber becomes red, and he attacks. If Survivor's world design departs from Fallen Order's routine, the way it structurally handles its antagonist doesn't. Before the credits roll, Cal will face Dagon 3 times, and the first 2 fights will give us a relatively simple boss that we never quite get to defeat, showcased by the goddamn health bar that doesn't empty because someone at Respawn hates me. This is all very similar to how the second sister was treated in Fallen Order, but Cal's strength is the focus rather than his weakness. He and we defeat Dagon in our first confrontation, and the only reason there's any game left is because Ravis comes to his rescue. But this wasn't all for nothing. The first in a long line of arrays has been activated, which means we're one step closer to reaching Tanalorr, and it's in that array that I can talk about one of the last things that makes Survivor's world so mesmerizing. Its reactivity. The game responds to Cal and the player's actions over its lengthy campaign, not in a choice-based way, but in a way that makes our journey feel like it's having an impact on the Kobo system. The skybox of each planet changes after we activate its corresponding array. We can see it blasting into the Kobo abyss, opening up the path to Tanalorr. After we rescue the massive bird that was stuck in the basalt forest, we can see it flying around the open world, watching Cal's journey with interest. And that later opens up a new secret area if we can find it again. The people of Rambler's Reach will mention Cal's actions, thanking him for helping them or commenting on his various successes, sticking it to the Bedlam Raiders. When we eventually find Merrin and explore Jedha with her, the game gives us contextless dialogue that tinkles away between the two of them. They'll talk about the passing of Seer following her death, or discuss random side quests like the Golden Skriton we can hunt. Eventually, a Star Destroyer will haunt the skies of Koboh and characters will raise how annoying it is. The gardener, Peely, is raging, not because of the Empire, but because it's blocking the sun from her plants. At the end of the game, as the troop prepare for the journey into Tanalorr, Grease will get increasingly confused and annoyed if you keep forcing him to fly you to other planets to finish off side quests. Wait, he says, so after all this we're not going to Tanalorr? Enemy dialogue returns in a way that keeps up the pep and adds levity despite how depressing the game's story gets. I'm reminded of the droid that stands affectionately admiring a rainbow on a cliff, but he's wrestling with a dilemma. What if he gets promoted for doing such a good job guarding this cliff? Then he won't be guarding it anymore, he'll be somewhere else giving orders and he won't get to see the rainbow. If the player waits and hears this all out, Cal will comment,
Dilemma solved.
after cutting him down. My only nitpick is I wish we got to save people from the Bedlam Raiders while running about. We meet a whole host of prospectors living in fear, talking about how hellish it is to live in constant danger. But Cal never comes across one being harassed in a way that lets him save them as a dynamic event. I don't even need these to be specifically unique or lead into quests. It would just be nice to maybe have a couple of enemy skirmishes where they've taken someone prisoner and we can release them so we can feel like the beat-to-beat exploration is having an impact. Where that impact is most directly felt is in Grease's Cantina, but to be frank, this section's long enough as it is, so I'm going to give Pyloon Saloon its own chapter. Just know that I'm going to gush like a goddamn gazer when we get there. I love this little shithole. Returning to Rambler's Reach, Cal breaks the news about Tanalorr to Grease, Z, and Bode, who's finally tracked us down using that signal locator we gave him back on Coruscant. Tanalorr means different things to different people when they learn about it. Grease thinks there might be something shiny there, but really, he's just happy to pilot the Mantis and help Cal again. Bode is intoxicated by the idea. It could be a safe place for his daughter, outside the reach of the Empire. And Z sees it as her purpose to uncover. This was her prime directive, and even though she's not locked to it, she doesn't want to stray from that path. And in a really small, complex interaction, she tells Cal the one thing he's needed to hear for 5 years.
We have both been through so much, but we must persevere, Cal. After all, what else is there to do?
That's right.
There's something really sad about that, I think. Z means it as words of comfort, but in Cal's current emotional state, he sees it as something else. Cere, Grease, Merrin, they all left him, flagging that persevering wasn't all that mattered, living was as well. But now here's this old droid who inadvertently puts the weight of the world on the Jedi's shoulders, reminding him that he has to keep fighting. In the context of everything we've seen, it's bad advice for Cal's health. He's running at 100 all the time, but at least this gives him a quiet moment of comfort.
Just about every other critic has been telling you how good the picture is. They've been falling over themselves to tell you. It's embarrassing. I feel guilty for not liking it as much as I'm supposed to. All the chasing and racing is very exciting, but it doesn't seem to have a larger purpose.
Hey kid, you like lightsabers? Cause Jedi Survivor is drowning in them. The bad guy has a lightsaber, the other bad guy has a lightsaber, some of the bounty hunters have lightsabers, hell, this guy has a lightsaber and he's just chilling in a cave. And if all of that isn't enough, then along comes a new combat system with 5 lightsabers to play with. And in case you mistake me, I love this. Survivor's combat has been tweaked in a whole bunch of little ways that makes its predecessor look like a tech demo. I loved Fallen Order's battles. They were far and away the best part of the game. But Survivor has upped the challenge and constantly forces you to play around with all the new toys it gives us. Enemy variety has been dramatically upped, with far more humanoid enemies to test our parry skills on, especially because separatist droids have finally entered the fray. The Bedlam Raiders dominate Koboh. Eventually, they'll be diluted by waves of stormtroopers, but on Jedha, the Empire is already here. This was Grease's idea. He thinks Cere might be able to give us a steer on how to get to Tanalorr. She settled down with a group called the Anchorites. They're currently trying to find ways to support the efforts of the Hidden Path, an underground network working to shield Force sensitives from the Empire. You might not remember this because of how forgettable the show was, but they also made an appearance in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Based purely off of this limited information and still harboring bitterness at Cere for ditching him, Cal doesn't think much of it. He never visited, he hasn't seen the good they're doing in action, mission, and when he gets a call from one of the anchorites, he mumbles their traditional greeting and gets straight to business. He never says it because he's too nice, but this look tells us he thinks they're just space hippies hiding in their temple.
I thought they'd send someone a bit more, unfamiliar.
I would not be so quick to judge, Cal Kestis. Much has changed since we last saw each other.
I can see that.
Seer has sent Merrin to escort us. She's got a new cool look and an even cooler new name, the Desert Ghost, so named because she's been travelling the galaxy torturing stormtroopers. Respawn, if you're listening, I would happily play that game. With Merrin in tow and a sea of stormtroopers between us and the hidden path, now feels like the perfect time to dig into Survivor's combat. Oh, wait, hang on, I've been playing a lot of Liza P recently, I forgot how to do this. Let's start with probably the wankiest analysis I've ever given on this channel. Cal can't use slow at will anymore. Instead, it's got its own meter gauge that gradually fills up during fights, like a special move. You can't use it as a crutch like most players did in Fallen Order, halting enemies for a free hit. Does its absence add to the difficulty? Yes, especially when fighting Dagan Gera on Grandmaster, but I think its absence is also kinda thematic. Battles in Survivor are generally much faster, encouraging aggression rather than defense. I think it's pretty apt that Cal, a character devoted to running sprints not marathons, is less willing to slow everything down now. Is that why slow has changed? Definitely not, but you know me, I love it when I can trace a path between mechanics and story. Because Survivor carries lightsaber stances and a whole host of abilities over from Fallen Order, it feels like the game gives us more time to evolve into a Jedi Master, and we need that time. Survivor's combat isn't perfect, but it is easy to use while being difficult to master. The sheer amount of goons we are fighting at any one time has been increased, so spatial awareness is an absolute must. In fact, I'd argue the numbers per encounter could have been decreased just a tad to really refine the experience. Ambushes are abound, and especially on Grandmaster difficulty where knocking down an enemy's stagger gauge takes a while, it can feel like you're barely making a dent, prolonging fights beyond what feels reasonable. It's likely why the game is so enthusiastic about tossing health upgrades at us. By the end, you can have 13 stims if you use the Fellowship perk, plus the health essences, plus the HP increases in our skill tree. Survivor knows you're going to get hurt, so it's arming you with the tools needed to make it to the end. But unlike Fallen Order, I would absolutely argue that Grandmaster is not the optimum way to play here. You might disagree, and as always I welcome it in the comments, but I think the game is perfectly balanced on normal difficulty, and I have more fun engaging with the default challenge than the Uber one. Perfect evades feel more necessary than before because the vast majority of enemies, like the Raiders, BX droids or Purge troopers, have unblockable attacks that close the gap between you and them quick fast. And don't get me started on the Rancor, whoever programmed its one-hit kill deserves a lightsaber up the ass. Dodging away, around or over them is still a viable option, but all of these enemies have a frustrating tendency to leap in, hit hard, and leap away, so that perfect evades will sometimes be the only way to keep up the attack. Just like in Fallen Order, perfect parries aren't the best way to quickly run down a grunt stagger meter. For the standard enemies, this works fine, but the big boys need you to play with your new tools. Cal can eventually unlock a blaster parry and a force parry that's trickier to get right but does much more damage to a guard. It's just a shame that Survivor follows in Fallen Order's tracks that achieving a guard break only opens up 2 or 3 hits as a reward, meaning it doesn't always feel worth it. The game's reactivity is present in combat too. For example, if we team up with Bode or Merrin, a takedown animation will incorporate them, and even if they're not around, we'll sometimes get unique animations based off of what lightsaber we're wielding at the time. If you're able to perfectly parry or dodge a sentry droid, Cal can cut the deadly weapons from their arms, and their moveset changes in response to it, meaning these fights will evolve the longer you keep fighting them. And that's not the only way droids evolve the longer a battle goes on. One of the things that hasn't immediately carried over to Survivor is BD1's hacking ability. By the end of Fallen Order, he could hack probe droids and security droids once he'd weakened them. But in Survivor, you need to re-earn these skills all over again through exploring or bringing Pucks back to the bounty hunter cage. I don't mind this, but for pacing's sake, I wish her shop opened up sooner. There are so many droid enemies across the game that it would add versatility to story-based combat if we could hack at least a couple of them from the get-go. When we finally start unlocking them, it can feel like it's too little too late.
I think we might have found something special. A place where the Empire can't find us. But it would mean leaving the fight. And the fight is all I know.
A sandstorm washes over Jeddah, forcing Cal and Merrin to hold up in a nearby cave. Because the fight is all he knows, he's burning too hot, too fast. The pain that defines him is like the fire Merrin asks him to look into. It warms him, keeps him company on dark, lonesome nights, but left unchecked, it will consume everything in its path. Merrin was wise enough to see that fire in herself. It's why she left the Mantis. She tells Cal that she had to see the galaxy on her own terms, not as part of a crew working sabotage for Saw Gerrera, and she's grown as a result of it. Cal acknowledges that she made the right choice. Her presence cools his fire. She soothes him. But you know what soothes me? 5 goddamn lightsaber stances! We are spoiled by how distinct each stance feels, how cool the individual animations look, and by detailed skill trees associated with them. No matter which review I watched at launch, everyone seemed to have a different favoured stance, which is testament to how meticulously Respawn's combat team have been creating them, while sharpening the edges of what was already a pretty fun combat system that was just crying out for refinement. In an interview with VGC, the game's lead producer Paul Hatfield agrees. Quote, "We use the term jank internally for stuff in the first game that doesn't work perfectly like we want to. For this game, we wanted to kill the jank and make it polished. It's always a balance of making sure everyone gets to execute on their bucket list. Stances are a good example of that. A full dual stance was planned for the first game, but we ran out of time, so in Survivor, the 5 stances are so integral. They were something we really wanted to do." So from a technical standpoint, Jedi Survivor isn't polished. Just look at whatever the hell this Skriton is doing, or how some of the arenas are so claustrophobic the camera bleeds into walls. But from a game design standpoint, I think the stances are practically perfect. They all have different speeds, different attack patterns, different damage outputs, and most crucially of all, they determine the length of Cal's guard meter. Swapping between whichever 2 we have selected on the fly while leaping, dashing, or guarding means that in the heat of battle, it doesn't feel like we have 2 separate weapons, but one evolving moveset that complements itself. Parrying an enemy with a dual stance just to leap into the air and come down with a heavy attack from the crossguard never gets old. The single lightsaber stance is relatively unchanged. It has a balanced swing, offers up attacks that have expanded reach, and applauds flying around an arena because its animations are so quick relative to the baddies. Where the dual stance was just a special attack in the last game, now it's a definitive strategy you can commit to. And it's ideal for those close quarters lightsaber duels because it's the one stance that lets Cal cancel attacks with L1, meaning you only have yourself to blame if you don't pull off that perfect parry. But the sacrifice here is that it does very little damage and has tiny reach. It's the stance for someone who prioritizes parrying and perfect evading. The crossguard is for heavy bruisers. This became my boss weapon until I fought Dagon and Bode, because you can hide behind its massive guard meter, and if you're patient enough and choose your moments, it can do solid damage. However, out in the world, it puts you at a major disadvantage because of the emphasis on ambushes and how cumbersome its swings are. The double-bladed lightsaber is for crowd control, but it's been given a split-second delay, so its speed isn't as overpowering as it once was, and so there's a tangible difference to how it feels compared to the dual stance. There's almost a beat before it all powers up, where Cal is completely vulnerable, but if you unlock the unlimited attack pattern, you can spin and whirl around until everything in the room is dead, or a big bastard clobbers you to the floor. Out of the 5, the blaster stance is the one that feels slightly limited. You shoot, you lunge, you charge shot. There's no timing-based flourishes like with the dual stance, or heavy shockwave smashes like the crossguard. Almost all of its upgrades focus on ammo, but the quickfire ranged attack and various options you can unlock for what it fires add a lot. Sometimes, spectacle and novelty is enough. I just don't think it's anything close to the best weapon for any Survivor situations.
Cal, you were just a child when they sent you off to war. You know, there was a time when I remember that the Jedi were more than just weapons.
The temple on Jedha is our second hub and offers some much needed downtime after such a lengthy skirmish through the ruins preceding it. Reuniting with Cere and the surprise appearance of Master Eno Cordova from the first game means the gang is officially back together. Plus Bode. Cal thought Cere had given up on the fight, but now that he's taken the time to actually come and see what she's up to, he realises that that was a stupid thing to assume. Bless your heart, Cal, if you just got over yourself and visited, you wouldn't be feeling so shitty. Cere hadn't given up. She just found a new way to push back with a hidden path. She's pursuing a revival of the old Jedi Order, the way it was before bureaucracy, politics, and the Clone Wars. Her efforts haven't been in vain either, managing to collect old Jedi texts and teachings, and we hear the anchorites discuss and debate the philosophies within. Cordova's appearance acts as a small but pleasant surprise. He too reflects Cal's destructive obsessiveness back at him. He recounts how he lost himself when the Jedi Council ignored his vision of Order 66 over a decade ago. The bitterness almost consumed him, but he managed to fight past it and find solace with Seer and the Anchorites.
I think he's trying to tell you something, Cal.
Cordova says that the Hidden Path have the resources to help the gang get to Tanalorr, but nobody really knows how exactly they'll get through the Koboh Abyss. Thankfully, Cordova pulls up the Star Wars wiki and points out that they'll need to get a compass to navigate it, and it turns out there's a couple out there. One is on Koboh, and the other is on the Shattered Moon. What this means is capital F freedom. The game slackens its grip here, letting us spend the next couple of hours learning what we can about Tanalorr, the compasses, and Dagan Gera in any order that we wish. It's substantial, which is good because we're not done with combat. Hey kid, you like XP? Cause Jedi Survivor is drowning in it. XP for killing stuff, XP for finding seeds, XP for scanning stuff. Hell, if you burrow deep enough, there's even skill points just lying around in the desert for us to pick up. And in case you mistake me, I love this! Just like with the first game, Cal doesn't get physically stronger when he levels up. He just becomes more spectacular by unlocking new moves and nuances to how his force powers work. On the whole, these skills are really cool. You can upgrade the confusion ability to force a bad guy to shoot his gun, or launch the double-bladed lightsaber in front of you and control it separately, like a bloody Beyblade. Force push, lift, slam, they can all be tweaked to work on heavier enemies, which ends up being a godsend against the massive monsters roaming each planet. But sticking with my nitpicks, some of them feel a tad underbaked. Here's a skill for the heavy crossguard you can unlock. Hold L1 in triangle to throw the lightsaber in a line through multiple targets. Hold it? Yeah, sure, and by the time I do that, I'll be bum rushed by 50 battle droids. This is the heavy stance, there's barely enough time to swing it. You expect me to just stand here and hold buttons? Skills like the lunging strike should have been unlocked from the get-go. It's a heavy attack. In fact, every heavy attack for every stance sits smugly as the first skill we can learn. Aside from the fact Cal already knows how to do all of this because of his past adventure, it also makes a bad first impression, like the skills we'll learn are quicksand to sink our points into. The repulsing burst for the double-bladed stance is just an airborne triangle attack, and it costs 2 skill points. There are 75 skills to unlock. Gifting us some of these from the offset wouldn't have reduced how rich the skill tree is. Pulling from other games that embrace Metroidvania mechanics, Jedi Survivor also has a perk system that encourages you to toy around with what playstyle suits you. Do you prefer ranged battles? Dexterity is here to increase your throw damage. Do you want to play a glass cannon? Fortitude bumps up Cal's damage and enemy damage. Are you a parry god? Precision is right there to make parrying tougher, but deals more stamina damage if you can make it work. None of these are going to break the game, but you definitely feel the difference if you're using them in a smart way. In the sequel, it'd be nice to see more depth added here, similar perhaps to how Blasphemous 2 uses its favours. In that game, if you equip perks belonging to the same family, like the Ecstatic Novice and Nacimiento, you get an extra secret perk that stops time when you heal. Clearly, the Jedi series isn't afraid to take what works from other games and carve it into a Star Wars version, so maybe perks could be reflective of various famous Jedi Masters, and you could combine them in a similar way for cool new powers. Imagine if you found perks belonging to Avar Kriss, who saw the Force as a melody, and Elzar Mann, who saw the Force as an ocean, and maybe Cal could use his psychometry to give new fans little stories from the age of the High Republic. I don't know, I'm getting carried away, but a guy can dream. Well wait, while I'm spitballing, another thing that I think could be quite cool in Game 3 is the addition of status effects. Shock from droids, burn from lightsabers, poison, etc. But then that would probably necessitate item use and consumables to build up Cal's resilience to those effects. And the Jedi series doesn't seem like it wants to bog itself down with item management like a typical Souls-like. I'm just wondering where Respawn think their combat system can go after this. Survivor feels like a complete lightsaber experience. With the exception of factions like the Nile, who might make an appearance in a future game, we're cutting down all the bad guys I'd want to in a Star Wars game with all of the lightsabers I'd want to use. While I'm excited about what a third game looks like, I'm even more curious to know what was left on the cutting room floor in this one, because with combat especially, it feels like they tossed the kitchen sink at it. Maybe that explains why it keeps shattering every now and then.
For all the talk about enhanced character development, the movie seems to finesse characterization rather more systematically and astutely than it explores it. It teems with exciting sequences, but one doesn't find prolonged moments of intimacy and rich profusion. The romantic interludes between Han and Leia, for example, are stolen moments, too fleeting to propel the relationship much beyond their initial prickly attraction in Star Wars.
Following our exploration of the Shattered Moon in Kobo, Cal brings the 2 Tanalorr compasses to Seer and Cordova. They're broken. Cordova doesn't know if he'll be able to repair them, but he's willing to give it a good old college try.
Master Junda, the Empire is nearing Pilgrim Sanctuary.
Is it a strike force?
No, an excavation team.
Good. And they don't know about the safe house.
Yet.
Safe house?
Hidden in the ruins. Have we begun evacuations?
They're already underway, but Brother Armaius isn't responding.
Thankfully, we don't need to twiddle our thumbs while we wait. The Empire is laying siege to a nearby Jedha safe house. It's time for a rescue mission. It's ironic that only a small part of Jedha is called the Arid Flats, because the majority of our desert planet is barren and lacking in excitement when we compare it to the lush variety that Kobo offers. I say majority because this sequence where we whirl through ruins and dusty brickwork to get to the safe house is some of the best level design in the game that takes full advantage of Cal's various abilities. We don't just lock one new move here, we unlock 2. So, let's talk about the Metroidvania of it all. Over the course of the story, Survivor will gift Cal with 8 new abilities. Mounts, the grapple, the dash, the magic dash, lift, drop, Kobo matter, and the electric charge. But all 8 of our past abilities like push, pull, swimming, etc. have been carried over as well. That's one hell of a toolbox Respawn can use to shape their game. Quite literally every single one of these abilities open up Jedi Survivor's world. New paths are amassed, new secrets are made available to us, and best of all, a lot of these abilities also recontextualize how we explore places we've already been through. Take the mounts. On Kobo we get the Relters and Chocobos. Neckos. On Jedha we get Mantabats and the goofy looking Spammels, a long-limbed grey camel creature that we can thank Rogue One for blessing us with. Both the Spammels and the Neckos can be summoned at any point if we're on flat terrain in these more open spaces. They're not just a novelty, they massively speed Cal up, can climb slippery surfaces, and give us extra height so we can reach inaccessible cliffs or ledges. Using these creatures makes Cal a more effective explorer, and makes general traversal much easier. In the past, I've talked about how good Metroidvania mechanics simultaneously open up the world and build a better hero. And typically when I've said that, I've looked at how unlockable abilities are used in combat. For example, in Fallen Order, push can open up bridges and also push stormtroopers off cliffs. But we can also build a better hero if these abilities just make them more delightful to control. In Survivor, not every ability strikes the right balance, but there's a lot to commend here. Swimming is less contextual now because the game is bigger. There's more mileage to include optional ponds and lakes to dive into. Flying on a Kestrel or Mantabat is simple, but it halves the time spent getting from point A to point B when returning to old areas. We'll talk about movement and platforming later, but Cal's abilities set up more nimble platforming when backtracking. Lift and drop make a difference in combat and open up new areas, but both abilities also unlock new shortcuts in older levels as well, so when you eventually return to these areas, Cal is simply faster at getting through them. He's a better explorer, a better hero.
We make a stand?
Do you trust me?
Of course. What are you up to?
The rescue mission is a shit show. Some of the anchorites get out, but Cal and Merrin fail to save our contact, Armaius, who sacrificed himself so the others could escape. The Empire have brought a humongous mechanized drill that's literally burrowing into these ruins, destroying centuries of history in an effort to snuff out the anchorites' work. Fearing that this might be the end, Merrin pulls Cal in for a kiss. Not for luck, she says, for her. Their relationship will remain complicated right until the credits roll, but the romance was blossoming off-screen for years. Their feelings for each other ripple underneath the plot of Sam Mag's novel. There is a gorgeous bit of optional writing later on, where the player can try to speak to Merrin about the kiss, and if they do, she'll say, "My sister said to discuss a spell is to unravel it, so let's let this one lie for now." Killer line, but that's not what I want to focus on. It's what she gives Cal that matters here. A tiny, magical charm that will let us dash through green laser gates and pass through Night Sister portals Merrin can summon. Cue our bombastic escape set piece. The spectacle and flair of this sequence is reminiscent of the AT-AT climb in Fallen Order. I was pretty harsh on that sequence when I talked about the game, but this new ability just strengthens my point, I think. The AT-AT climb had no challenge. It was impossible to die during the scaling of it in the shooting section, only the brief bit of combat inside was a threat.
But you can fail this on-rails flying section with Merrin, and it's the final test of whether or not we've mastered Cal's new dash. Out of all of his new abilities, this is the most substantial. It opens up the world and builds a better hero in more ways than one. The dash makes Cal far more dynamic in combat. In fact, it gives us a momentary escape from enemies because of its substantial reach. The grapple also builds a better hero, but in a more contextual way, where the dash has second-to-second decision-making associated with how freeing it is as a movement option. It's clear that, while cool, the grapple serves one purpose and one purpose only: to reset Cal's position during trickier platforming. You can't grapple onto anything, this isn't an ARKHAM game, Cal's not Spider-Man, so it's only specific contextual grapple points. Because it's contextual, it's hard to argue that it makes Cal a better explorer. Having the grapple doesn't improve how he controlled before getting it just lets us interact with stuff that wasn't previously interactable. I don't mean this as a direct criticism though. Making the grapple useful in combat would most likely undermine having force pull. Being able to grapple to anything would undermine 80% of the level design, and Survivor's level design, especially when it's fast-paced and varied, is one of its greatest achievements. But the success of its Metroidvania-isms are more Metroid-Brainia-isms. That sounded better on paper. So many of our old and new abilities are speaking to each other on the regular now. The player gets to feel smart about combining them in combat, exploration, and movement to strengthen Cal, solve puzzles, or unlock new areas. Just because the grapple is contextual doesn't mean that it doesn't complement our other moves. In fact, the grapple, force push, and force pull all work in tandem with one another once we unlock its upgrade that zips Cal up to the air balloons. We need to pull a balloon towards us, figure out where it's best placed, throw it there with force push, and then grapple up to it. And often, if you cock up the positioning, Cal's dash will play a major part in correcting your mistake. Player freedom, player creativity aren't just encouraged by our abilities, they're necessitated. But where we're going next illustrates my point more, so back to the story.
Glad you made it back in one piece.
Master Cordova, did you find a way across the abyss?
No, but you may have, Cal.
Making it back to Seer and Cordova, they tell us that they've managed to uncover some hidden data in the archives. Whilst Cordova couldn't repair the compasses we found, it turns out that there's a third one that Dagon is likely going after back on Kobo. And worst yet, he and Ravis have kidnapped our droid friend Z in the hope she'll be able to tell them where it is. So, it's the Bode and Cal show. Alongside our new best friend, we infiltrate an old separatist Looker Hulk that's imaginatively been stripped back into a tribal camp. Stormtrooper helmets are impaled on spikes, yurts have been constructed inside, and it's a lengthy, tricky part of the game that forces us to play around with our new skills and treat its exploration as one big puzzle to solve. For example, Cal unlocks lift and drop here, and there's a chain of gameplay where we need to use drop to lower a climbable wall, the double jump and dash to reach that climbable wall, and then lift to zap a Bedlam Raider, all in the space of about 20 seconds. These moments don't just happen in the main campaign, they are bloody rife while hunting for collectibles and solving puzzles in the open world. At Rambler's Reach, there's a house belonging to this guy, Sunt Madus. It's covered in cameras, blast doors are shut down, and there's an eerie air of mystery coating the house. For good reason too. When we get inside, we see Sunt tied up his brother in his basement and murdered him. Getting into this house lets us trace our path to progression. We need to use push, pull, and lift to break in. Maybe you think that example's too simple. Well, just look at this one. Force pull, force push, a double jump, wall run, dash. We're not guided by the hand, we figured this out ourselves. The game has given us a box of tools and we need to figure out which screwdrivers fit which screws, while also tying that screwdriver to a pole so it can reach the bloody screw. Survivor has given us a Metroid Toolbox, and a whole host of scenarios and puzzles to solve with it. Do I think there's some missed opportunities? Yes. BD1's two unlocks, the Kobo Matter and the Electric Charge, are entirely contextual and don't build a better hero in any sense of the word. Especially the Electric Charge feels like it could have played a vital role in taking on droids. Maybe it could have a cooldown in combat that overcharges a droid's guard meter, but the constant way that the game connects them to Cal's other skills makes them feel meaningful. The beauty here comes primarily from the pacing. As we discussed, it's incredibly rare that Survivor slows the player down to deal with a puzzle room unless you're tackling the Jedi temples, but even these temples regularly play with different aspects of Cal's abilities. BD1 eventually can shoot Kobo Matter and we need to lay out a trail to burn away openings or release orbs, but that's often not the end of the story.
Force push and pull are still integral to moving these orbs, but there's sequences where we need to wall run, dash, jump, etc. to get the right angle or move parts of the space around so we can lay out a path for the matter. Unlike with Fallen Order, I had fun with Survivor's puzzle box design, and BD1 especially doesn't feel relegated to a keycard or health dispenser anymore.
That droid is mine.
I suppose I'll rescue myself.
So you survived Ravis. How? The usual.
We're not with Bode for the entirety of the Looker Hulk, but he's here for significant chunks. His inclusion is welcome because we've not had much time alone with him since Coruscant, and reuniting with our old friends might distract us from his importance if left any longer. He teases Cal about his relationship with Merrin, probing how important it is to the young Jedi. He encourages Cal to take stock of what matters to him, the same way Bode's ultimate motivation is his daughter Kata. Rescuing Z is complicated by a quick confrontation with Ravis and an eventual second encounter with Dagan Gera. Dagan's obsession with Tanalorr has blinded him to everything else. His mutual respect with Ravis is bordering on using him, but the two are still clearly partners in their search. Dagan cut down numerous members of the Jedi Order before he was put into the Bacta tank. He didn't need to harbour centuries of resentment turned to the dark side. And Cal still doesn't quite see how the old Jedi is reflecting his own obsessiveness back at him. Cal isn't Dagan, but the game makes it clear here that it wouldn't take much for him to slip into a similar mindset. Regardless, Dagan and Ravis make their escape from the Looker Hulk and race off to the Shattered Moon. The last working compass awaits, and Team Cal isn't far behind them. But first, let's make a quick pit stop.
What we have in fact with The Empire Strikes Back is a long, rather odious and decidedly open-ended story. On the way, we get some stunning and very noisy special effects, only made possible by the successful coup of the first film.
Come to Pyloon Saloon, and we hope to see you soon.
Catchy song. Maybe you missed her calling.
The sequel to the novel The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. The titular restaurant is called Milloway's, a place that looks like a giant glittering starfish locked in a time bubble. Its wine list is so long it fills 3 volumes. Diners can afford their meal there by simply putting a penny in their savings account because Milloway's sits at the end of the universe. All of that time means the interest that builds up from that penny will let you afford whatever you like. It's ridiculous. It's impossible. Its biggest selling point is you experience 5-star service while witnessing a Nabgib, a reverse Big Bang. It is my favourite fictional eatery. Pyloon Saloon doesn't have anything nearly as fantastical as Milloway's, but it almost tops it for me. So, while Cal charges through the base on Shattered Moon preparing for a battle to the death with Ravis, I want to talk about the cantina, side quests, and the game's focus on customization, because they are Survivor's best ideas. Across the galaxy, we'll find various people in side quests or just hiding off the beaten path that we can recruit to Rambler's Reach in Pyloons. Jawas will take over a scrap shop. A pit droid will hang around the landing pad and work on the Mantis. These are 2 inconsequential inclusions. They don't add much except for unlocking a room that gives us a reward, but inside the saloon is where the joy lies. Tully and Bima take over a back room and set up a game of holotactics. Ash and DDEC become the cantina's DJ. Scuva unlocks the aquarium, and Peely helps our rooftop garden to flourish. It's great to watch Pyloons grow because it unlocks new stuff to play around and interact with. But the really lovely part is what all of this says about Cal. Through our visits and our efforts to help Rambler's Reach flourish, we can trace Cal's status as more than a lightsaber. He becomes a hero to these people, bringing them together, helping them find a cozy little corner of the galaxy to thrive in. It's more than just a hub for quests. He helps bring people out of their shell. We can trace Monk's affection for Z or Moran's walls starting to come down as he learns to trust again. Even when the crew of the Mantis is struggling to find their way back to one another, Cal's earnestness is able to be the catalyst for another budding community. He is the hero of Kobo, their protector. Doma tells us as much, thankful that she doesn't need to shoulder the burden of town bodyguard alone anymore. Eventually, Cal will hit an emotional low point, overwhelmed by grief when Seer dies, and if we bring him back to Pyloons, the patrons will have various words of wisdom for him.
I lost some friends. If I'd done something differently, maybe they'd still be alive.
No.
Practically every character in Ramblers will tell Cal at some point in his journey to slow down and focus on the little moments. The game openly tells us to take a beat in Pyloons and get invested in the friends we're making along the way. And while not every character's story is a winner, for example I didn't get much out of Winnie and Zig's relationship, there are layers to unearth and we'll even see them cross paths with each other. Grok and Dana are two prospectors hunting for treasure, taking scrap from the Bedlam Raiders and the Empire. It's a recipe for disaster, but they'll eventually have their fortune read by Tulakt and grossly misinterpret it, resulting in the unfortunate death of Grok. Cal finds Dana drinking alone, without her grumpy friend to keep her spirits up anymore. And at first, Dana will be defensive. She doesn't want to say goodbye to Grok, so she doesn't want our sympathy. But if we keep checking in on her, she'll pass through the various stages of grief. Mosey, Zig, Winnie, Tulakt, they all eventually leave when the Empire invades Kobo for real, and while they vanish with good grace, it's sad to see them go. Turgle always has a new scheme, and we see Har scoff at his various adventures until eventually coming around to respect him. Though, to be honest, Har kinda comes out of nowhere and is far too familiar with Cal, so it raised an immediate red flag for me. What does he know? What's he hiding? I don't trust that smile. But the point is that they're not just exposition machines. There are full histories and politics and relationships that are fleshed out in the details if you're looking for them. For example, Guido and Gulu, the two town grumps, have lived in Rambler's Reach for years, and we can find force echoes of their reluctant first date. It's very rare that you'll saunter up to someone and they'll give you a quest straight away without earning Cal's trust. It does happen, but it's rare, meaning side quests don't feel quite as artificial as they do in other games. Ubisoft. The hands-off way that Pyloons is handled is where I think all of this extra silly stuff becomes satisfying. There's often a part 2 associated with our actions. Bringing in a DJ leads to finding various pieces of original music to play in the bar. Introducing holotactics makes BD1's scanning of enemies doubly useful. It doesn't just give us XP anymore, it unlocks new units for us to use in the minigame. Just like Gwent in Witcher 3 or Wheels in Sea of Stars, I'm a sucker for a fleshed out collectathon minigame like this. An easy 10 hours of my first playthrough was given over to holotactics, and even playing this minigame rewards us with resources, clothes, or even a skill point. Recruiting Scuva Stev isn't the end of his story, it's barely the beginning. We get to fill up the Cantina Aquarium to add more colour and vibrancy to the space, and he tells us his epic tale about the fearsome Captain Wet. Though I would say that Scuva's story does feel like it's going somewhere, like Captain Wet was going to become a secret boss. He's still out there, maybe he'll rear his ugly head in the sequel. Recruiting people or getting to know them will lead to chests otherwise inaccessible. Finding seeds in Kobo means we can bring them back and customize the rooftop garden, which is a fun time sink, but as we grow more plants, eventually the vines will open up the space around Pyloons again, resulting in chests. While the garden and the music are the only ways we can personalize Pyloons, and getting to change the color of the walls or the seating would be really cool, I'd hesitate to say any of this feels lacking because customization elsewhere is so addictive.
Were there any sort of suggestions or ideas that got pitched that just didn't work? Like either they were too out there, they were kind of too on the nose.
Well, it's funny that you asked that because one of the ones that I originally thought were going too far with was the mullet. And I'm like, come on. Like, it's like he looks ridiculous with this thing. Yeah. But everybody loved it. It was one of those ones. I mean, I'm not going to argue with like playtesting.
Speaking as someone who liked the ponchos in Fallen Order, I'll be the first to say Survivor's cosmetics are on another level. Haircuts, facial hair, jackets, tops, trousers, our blaster, BD1, and our lightsaber are all fully configurable now. This is the Star Wars fantasy. Hanging out in a cantina is just a small part. The real magic is in these menus. Stig Asmussen might have arched an eyebrow at giving Cal a mohawk, but it let me carve up my own Jedi Knight and roleplay with various looks or lightsabers that I felt matched his characterization during any given moment. Any interview you see with him comes back to density and player ownership of Cal, and the game completely masters that feeling. You can lose yourself in this system, making sure BD1's look complements Cal's and Cal's complements his weaponry. I'm not a fashionista, but I took great pride in how my Cal looked. Be nice about him in the comments. These cosmetics are more addictive than any AAA garbage loot system ever could be. It feels more classical in how the stuff you find rewards you because it's all unique.
Paint jobs, haircuts, lightsaber hilts, they're all more rewarding than a level 32 sword that's identical to your level 31 sword is because the player doesn't sacrifice anything to engage with it. You don't need to whip up a spreadsheet to compare various numbers, you don't need to fear that the treasure you're finding is going to be borderline useless. Hell, you don't even need to find any of it if you don't want to. I'm finding collectibles because I want to, meaning I feel like I have the power, rather than being funneled into collecting shite because enemy scaling is forcing me. I am intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. Intrinsic because the puzzles are brief but engaging because of all the Metroidvania stuff we just covered, and extrinsic because look at this, I can make Centauri Kree's bloody lightsaber. What I find particularly interesting is that Survivor's team didn't flush its cosmetics with recognizable iconography. Lightsaber hilts are outfit designs that pull from the wider Star Wars canon. Outside of the deluxe edition stuff like Han Solo's trousers, any cosmetics associated with known names are all Respawn's creation. Jaro Tapal, Seer Junda, Eno Cordova. It's not really praise or criticism, I can see why it isn't there, but I'd also love it if it was. I'd just like to know what the thought process was. Did the team want all of the cosmetics to be lore relevant? It'd be weird finding Mace Windu's lightsaber out on Jedha, for example.
A map. What greater knowledge can one bestow than to help those that follow find their way? My journey is nearly at its end. When I look back, I see suffering, sadness, yes, but also joy and friendship.
Cordova's lightsaber is a reward for completing the various temples he sends us out to collect on Jedha. As a side quest, this complements the puzzle rooms and temples of Kobo, but they're specific to Cordova's research into the Jedhan landscape, and we get to breathe his awe and wonder as a part of it. You can complete these temples before the endgame, but I think there's sincere emotional resonance if you wait until after he dies, because you get a final message from him that comforts Cal while mourning him. It's one of the very few times that Survivor's emphasis on freedom feels at odds with itself. Locking this temple off until Cordova's passing would ensure every player gets to say goodbye to him when it feels natural. Whilst that example is a little clumsy, Survivor's side quests bleed into the main campaign in a really natural way, so they don't feel segregated from the wider adventure. Beneath the shack on Kobo, we find force echoes of Ravis hunting for Dagan Gera before Cal arrived on the planet, so we can learn more about our villains even when we're not following the story. They never feel laborious or fetch questy because they're framed as rumors. Someone will simply tell Cal, hey, I heard there's something cool over there, so we can let our curiosity lead us. Always optional, never mandatory, adding to that feeling of player control. And as a bonus point, they all end when you complete that location. None of them require Cal to go back to the quest giver. Well, that's not entirely true, is it? Because the best set of side quests do need us to keep hopping back to Pyloon's.
Boba! Boba! Looking slick, buddy.
Cage, it's been a while.
You two know each other?
We go way back.
Cage Vanda is a Nautolan bounty hunter mysteriously hanging out in the cantina. She's rueful, mysterious, and distinctly untrustworthy, but she learns that the Haxian brood, still mad at Cal because he messed them all up back in Fallen Order, has put a bounty on him. What follows are 16 bounty missions that takes Cal back to locations we've already explored. The Haxian brood aren't just limited to the bounty hunter boss fights, they're an entire faction with enemy types unique to them. It's in these missions that we get to feel Cal's growth most prominently, purely because we're backtracking through areas we've already conquered, speeding through them twice as quickly. It's no wonder Survivor had 12 writers playing various roles during development, because even these bounty hunters get fully fleshed characters laid out for us in their charts. You don't need to know that Gat Mito was a big game hunter before she joined the brood, but it's there to add dimension to the people we're cutting in half, and I liked learning about my prey before going out on the hunt. Once we've completed all 16 missions, we're rewarded with a unique boss fight. Cage lures us to a remote part of Kobo and draws her blaster. She's been using us to kill off the competition and drive our value up, and we can see how Cal's grown when he gives her the chance to surrender, a direct contrast to how he cut down the Ninth Sister at the start of the game. Cage is tough because she keeps darting around the arena, aggressive but from a distance, incorporating gimmicks and twists on practically every bounty hunter we fought before her. But a secret boss, bounty puck, and blaster aren't the only rewards we're given. Survivor's insistence on pouring treats on the player continues with a cheeky cameo from Boba Fett.
He's come looking for Cage. She is his bounty. When C-3PO appeared in Ahsoka, or Leia bungled about a forest in Obi-Wan Kenobi, I rolled my eyes so far back into my skull that they practically popped out the other end. Star Wars media has devolved into jangling keys at its audience to make up for dull visuals and a vacuum of charisma. But this, Boba Fett showing up for 2 minutes? I don't mind this at all. There's adoration to his inclusion without it being a distraction. He doesn't interrupt our boss fight, we get to battle Cage all by ourselves. He doesn't get in the way of the main story, this is a lengthy, layered set of combat challenges distinct from the Tanalorr plot. When Luke Skywalker shows up at the end of Mandalorian Season 2, massacres the bad guys and inserts himself into Grogu's life, it feels fucking violating. I was really enjoying myself before the bloody Skywalkers got involved, but Boba Fett doesn't change the trajectory of Cal's story. No agency is ripped away from the player or our Jedi Knight by his inclusion. The balance is just right.
Long ago, Dagan bested me in combat. Earned my loyalty. We fought side by side until the Jedi betrayed him.
It took us long enough, but jumping back to the main story, Cal faces Rayvis down at the top of the Shattered Moon. The fight to him is long, complemented by Rayvis monologuing over the speakers and telling us all about his relationship with Dagan Gera. Years ago, Dagan bested him in combat. Ever since, he vowed to work with the Jedi until the day comes that he can find his warrior's death. That day is today. As a boss, Rayvis is fantastic. 2 phases form a tricky but feasible uphill climb in difficulty. He starts with slow but devastating swings, but by the halfway point you need to parry and dodge a flurry of relentless attacks that never seem to end. But when the dust settles, Cal defeats him, and just like with Cage, he offers Rayvis mercy, hoping to play on the Gendai's sense of honor. "I've defeated you," he says. "Fight with me." But Rayvis refuses. Before he dies, he tells us that the final compass isn't here. It's at Centauri Kree's observatory back on Kobo. That's where Dagan Gera's gone. Frustrated, Cal gives him his warrior's death, but despite how successful this fight was, he feels conflicted. As he heads back to the Mantis, he starts to question how different he is from Dagan Gera. They're both killing their way to Tanalorr. He's starting to understand what Grease meant when he said he's more than just a lightsaber.
That asteroid isn't big enough to have a significant gravity well. I'll bet you could reach escape velocity by firing a double-barreled shotgun at the ground, and if the asteroid doesn't have gravity, then it can't hold an atmosphere. And even if our heroes are not breathing the atmosphere, then they still need the pressure of an atmosphere in their bodies to keep from exploding. Oh, I bet you're fun at parties.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Had to swat a few bedlam flies to make a landing.
No problem. We got a whole swarm of them up ahead.
The build-up, climax, and aftermath of the Kobo Observatory is the highlight of Survivor's campaign. Dagan Gera waits at the top with the compass. Our confrontation is nigh, but by the time we arrive, there's a full siege underway. The Bedlam Raiders versus the Empire. A battle reminiscent of the Clone Wars stands between us and our goal. While a lot of the observatory spent cutting down troopers and droids, there's also a whole host of leaping and swishing and platforming, so it's finally time to start talking about movement. Cal's many new abilities let the level designers be more creative with their maps, introducing tricky platforming sections that require us to treat our various movement abilities almost like resource management. Passing through a laser gate or landing on a wall run resets Cal's double jump and his dash, so you need to space these options out and swap between them when moving. On the whole, this makes movement feel much more creative because there's a give and take, there's options. It's ridiculously tight and responsive, absolutely no delays to be found. With the grapple, the dash, the double jump, wall running, pulling ropes, using laser shields to reset our abilities, you can make Cal glide through the air. If you want to really challenge yourself, there are forced tears that a Cal can tap into that not only give us tough combat gauntlets, but absolutely insane platforming sequences where once you leave the starting point, you practically never touch the ground. My only problem with these is they're not easily accessible after the fact. I wish every force tear we unlocked could be replayed from a meditation point, because when you're in the groove and Cal is zipping along wires or flashing through laser gates, we get traversal beats that I put up there with Insomniac swinging, except the beauty of Survivor's platforming is that, except for climbing, none of it is on autopilot like Spidey's webs are. This isn't parkour like Assassin's Creed where the R2 button does all of the work. You are forced to alternate between Cal's various moves. but it's not perfect.
Scaling a beaten-up warship, just like the old days.
The year is 2023. We are about halfway through the 9th generation of consoles. Silk Song still doesn't have a release date. The new Legend of Zelda has made impossible game physics possible. Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 has eviscerated the concept of loading screens. Tango Gameworks has designed a combat system that turns every fight into a goddamn musical. Seriously, Hi-Fi Rush is fantastic. So I hope we can all agree that games have grown beyond squeezing through gaps to mask loading screens or pushing up on the analog stick to climb along walls. This sort of image dominated Fallen Order and makes an unfortunate return in Survivor. But it annoys me less for one simple reason. Survivor's level design has really tight pacing where climbing along walls, which is abjectly the worst gameplay in the series, doesn't happen nearly as frequently. But it is still here too much. Platforming feels good, but there is still an over-reliance on climbing that lets it down because it's such a nothing activity compared to wall running and flipping and, you know, fun Jedi shit. Anything that stops Cal from being fluid during platforming sections just lends itself to frustration. But climbing is just one part of what we can do. Now you're on mounts that have astonishing leaps. You're wall running, wall jumping, dashing, flipping, grappling. How you get around a level is generally speedier, more fluid, and more varied. For example, on Jeddah there's a lengthy section where wind is our greatest enemy and we need to work around it. The climbing now has stakes, it's not just a crutch to pad out the level. On the Shattered Moon, Ravis activates an array that blasts a powerful laser, so Cal needs to maneuver around it, dodging its quick bursts of energy. On the ISB base, there are full combat encounters where laser shields activate, so we need to be mindful of our surroundings while cutting down the bad guys. We're finally getting moments where platforming works in tandem with fighting, meaning the level design feels more holistic. Here at the Kobo Observatory, we're bouncing through the air on balloons to the backdrop of spaceships fighting, relying on precariously long drops that can be an asset and a threat. There's more to say here, but Cal's reached the top of the observatory, and Dagon Gera waits for no man.
The order is gone and I am free!
You're not free, Dagon. You're alone.
Why are you here when your true enemy is out there? How could you let the galaxy fall to this unworthy machine of an empire?
One of the things I love about Dagon Gera is how we get glimpses of him conquering the observatory as we leap our way up to him. The Empire don't stand a chance, and he's embarrassed that such a loose force destroyed the Jedi Order. Because enemies like Purge Troopers are so tough in gameplay, it doesn't undermine the threat of the Empire, but by contrast, Dagon presents himself as a force to be reckoned with. The world has moved on from the strength of the Jedi. Dagon is here to remind us of the glory days. He realized that everyone he cares for is gone. He's lost those closest to him, Centauri, Ravis, the Order, but he thinks that makes him free, lost in his obsession. He's going to take Tanalorr and recreate the Jedi Order, not as a spiritual force for good, but a militant army. It's a different fight altogether from every other time we've battled him. We dance on a force platform, the room is reversed, he summons illusions of himself and even makes Cal hallucinate that Bode has been killed. Everything about this screams well-balanced final boss because it's tough as nails without being overbearing. Your best bet in defeating him is relying on Cal's flexibility and agility, but when his health bar hits 0, Cal beats him in a way that is fully unique to him. He taps into Dagon's memory of Centauri Kree, almost by accident, and summons an illusion of her. Dagon shatters, his body drops, reminded of his pain, but before he can fully retaliate, Bode shoots him and Cal cuts him down. It's over, right? In the quiet of the observatory, Cal wonders if Dagon was right. He thinks of how Tanalorr could be a fortress for the Hidden Path, not just a new world. It could be a new headquarters in the fight against the Empire. Bode disagrees. He just wants it to be somewhere his daughter can be safe. If it's given to the Hidden Path, there's no guarantee the Empire wouldn't eventually find it. Retrieving the compass, the gang decide to head back to Jeddah to recuperate. You can fast travel there, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to take the long way down because there's still more to say about movement. Cal's speed doesn't just come from moves like the dash or the grapple. Generally, he's faster too. We're no longer painstakingly climbing up ropes, we are launching up them. Climbing is basic, but he scurries across surfaces rather than awkwardly wobble along them like before. A side-by-side comparison shows this off best.
On the whole, Respawn have focused their attention on quality of life improvements to make sure all the cool stuff is satisfying to do and the tedious stuff is less intrusive. But less is the key part of that phrase. There are still a couple of arbitrary "you can't wall run" or "you can't climb this climbable looking surface" moments like craggy rocks. This makes for more meticulous platforming, sure, but I think the signposting can be regularly muddied. It's a pro-con situation because that muddy signposting does mean we're encouraged to be curious about the environment. Can I make that jump? Can I climb that? Can I run along that wall? These questions pop up regularly while exploring, and it forces us to figure out how to use the environment to our advantage. 99% of the time, platforming doesn't feel rigid. But if you look over there, there is that 1% still sitting on the horizon. Fall damage, a personal frustration from Fallen Order, is carried over to Survivor tenfold because its level design is generally more vertical. The consistency of how far Cal can fall is annoying as hell because it isn't consistent, and it always feels like the double jump should soften his landing, but it doesn't. That's where the rigidness does appear. I don't think that Cal should be able to fall a full mile just to save himself with a quick hop, but moments like this? It's baffling how that would kill him. The player has such a varied moveset now that lets them really play around with platforming options, but sometimes the game punishes you for playing with those options to the point that it feels arbitrary. When you're figuring out the level design and following tricky platforming challenges, it feels incredible, but especially if you're playing on Grandmaster, you can't afford to be punished for thinking creatively. And sometimes, Survivor does just that. Arriving back on Jeddah, Cordova announces that he needs some time to examine the compass we took from Dagon. Grease, Seer, Merrin, Bode and Cal all retire outside for some downtime, but purely through dint of this being a video game, there's tension boiling between each line of dialogue. Dagon Gera was a pretty epic boss fight, but we killed him long before we've gotten to Tanalorr. It feels like the story's concluded, and yet, we're still playing. So, let's break it down. Cal tells Seer about his plan to bring the hidden path to Tanalorr and she agrees, clearly touched by the offer. He connects with Merrin, tells her that he knows what he wants now. The soapbox he stood on since Fallen Order is starting to break. With Tanalorr so close, he's willing to give up on the old Jedi ways and give in to his feelings for her. It's tender and lovely. And speaking as someone who initially did not want Cal and Merrin's relationship to be romantic, Cameron Monaghan and Tina Ivlev quickly made me change my mind. Look at these two crazy kids. As for Bode, something's bothering him. He says he's thinking about his daughter, lost in his own thoughts. There's a great line where Cal comforts him by saying, "When she sees what you've done for her, she'll understand." When he says it, he's thinking about how hard the fight with Dagon was, how long the adventure has been for the two of them. But in just a few minutes, it'll take on a whole new meaning.
I'm really sorry about this. Oh.
Son. Son, you don't have to do this. No!
The game's tension bursts wide open when Bode kills Eno Cordova, steals the compass, and runs away. In a flash, everything changes. Cal chases him down on a speeder bike and we see that the Empire is officially invading, a siege on the Archive. But that's not all. Mechanically, Survivor dismantles its power fantasy as the story dismantles Cal's worldview. It's a quick-fire descent into an all-is-lost moment that's complemented by peaks and troughs that flag just how small and inconsequential the efforts of Cal and the Mantis crew really are in the grand tapestry of the Star Wars rug. It starts with the loss of our healing ability. A brief boss fight with Bode robs us of BD1 because we've left him back at Seer's archive. Psychologically, the player's assumption that defeating Bode will be easy because he's not a special magic boy with a lightsaber is destroyed when he pulls out a red one, pushes Cal back with the Force, and knocks him out. He's not just a mercenary, he's a dark Jedi. Flashing to playing a Seer as she knocks back Imperial forces feels like a mechanical band-aid. She's incredibly strong, with the strength of the crossguard stance but the speed of the single blade. Even on Grandmaster, enemies are opened up to one-hit kills with just one parry, fueled by her ability to tap into the strength of the dark side without losing herself.
but her power doesn't last long. Darth Vader appears, and the lengthy boss fight that follows shows us how tiny Cere's power is in comparison to him, while also showing us how powerful Cal has become in the main campaign. We are missing so many of Cal's tricks as Cere. We've got less healing items, only one stance. I know I'm not alone when I say if I fought Vader as Cal, I wouldn't have nearly as much trouble, but this bastard destroyed me on my first playthrough, and returning fights didn't feel much easier. He throws the book at the player. Literally. Vader's appearance isn't as shocking in Survivor as it was in Fallen Order, but it doesn't just feel like a cameo fight because his presence reinforces the explosive turn the story has taken and flags again why Tanalorr is so important. Even on a quiet, peaceful night where success is on the horizon, a double agent and the Empire are here to remind us that nowhere is safe, and Vader's grip on the landscape of the Force is total. He literally destroys remnants of the Jedi Order as he beats Cere down. He's the crackle of the storm, and her death wouldn't hit nearly as hard if we didn't get to struggle through her final moments. As a boss, Vader forces us to be on the defensive because it's the only way to drop his stagger meter. None of our attacks knock it down by that much, so it's all about the parries and the perfect evades. With one-hit grab kills that home in on us like a bloody missile, agility is no longer the focus, but through her blood, sweat and tears, Cere, shockingly, is able to best him. It looks like she's won, but a last-ditch stab through the gut as she goes in for the killing blow is what gets her. And Cal witnesses all of it through psychometry. As she dies, she mourns her two apprentices, Trilla, the Padawan she failed, and Cal, the Padawan she saved. The pain that's defined Cal all these years grows, and while the goal of Tanalorr remains consistent, it's not his focus. So, with all the pieces on the board, let's finish up and talk about Bode.
The final third of the film has the effect of slowing down the action just when it all should be mounting toward a climax, despite a twist that's straight out of Greek mythology and should serve Lucas well in the episodes that lie ahead. Empire may not top Star Wars, but it certainly makes one look forward to whatever new surprises George Lucas and his band of cinematic wizards can conjure up for us.
When did you call the Bode twist? For me, it was the reviews.
Bode is the real standout, voiced by Noshir Dalal, whose voice you'll absolutely recognize since he's done a huge amount of stuff in the gaming space. He's just a really well-written, well-acted character that I loved hanging out with. He's the sort of scoundrel archetype in the Star Wars universe, but with an emotional twist that makes him very real and really grounds everything he says and does.
Jedi Survivor is now a testament to why I won't watch reviews of a game I'm looking forward to. I know people mock giving numerical scores or focusing all of our attention on Metacritic ratings, but the good thing and bad thing about those systems is that a number is dimensionless. I can look at an 8 out of 10 and see that a game is probably going to be pretty good without learning about the good and bad. Of course, the issue with this is because a number is dimensionless, I won't know if my tastes will align with the reviewer. It's a risk every time. But the Jedi Survivor reviews let the game's story down. Everybody talked about Bode. Everybody gushed about how impactful a character he is and how he put such a monumental stamp on the game. But by the time we defeat Dagan Gera, he's had minimal characterization. He's a rueful bounty hunter who loves his daughter. And what that meant was he either had a badass death going out in a blaze of memorable glory, or he was a traitor. Once Dagan's dead, the only option is traitor. But even in the confines of Survivor, I have mixed feelings.
Why couldn't we sense him?
He deceived us all.
No, I still should have been able to.
Now that's enough! Cal. That's enough, okay? What Bode did, that is on him.
The menu is red now. The way Cal sees the Force is coloured by his pain. His inability to take stock of his grief is putting him in danger of falling to the dark side. Just like Dagan. Just like Bode. His bitterness at the Empire has transformed into rage at Bode. We follow him to an Imperial security base in the Nova Garen system. It turns out Bode has been an ISB agent all this time. Survivor's fantastic world building continues on the ISB base. The ISB aren't a new concept. They've popped up before in stuff like Star Wars Rebels, Andor, the Vader comics, the new Thrawn books, and I think they're one of the best things Star Wars has added to the characterization of the Empire. A secret security force that's less focused on large-scale battles and more in the Cold War that comes with dominating the galaxy. Survivor builds on what we've seen before by highlighting how much tension there is inside the Empire's own forces. Evil isn't clever, especially when it's on a mass scale, and we see how fascism is always destined to eat itself. There's politicking here between the Bureau and the Inquisitors. The Force, trained and led by Darth Vader, are way further up in the Empire's hierarchy, but the ISB is trying to worm its way around them, hiding mistakes and incompetencies, like secretly recruiting an ex-Jedi as an ISB agent. It seems that despite the Empire's emphasis on control, it can't control human pettiness and spitefulness. As we fight through the base, Cal finally taps into the dark side, and it evolves into a new power-up. L3 and R3 to accept the truth, embrace the darkness. It's the slow power combined with a raw, furious energy. I love that we have Cere's fighting style when we activate it, and it fills up so damn quickly, and the enemies we're battling are purge troopers and sentry droids, bad guys that are hellish to take down, so that the player is actively encouraged to use it as much as possible. Canonically, Cal is wielding the dark side, and he almost gives in to his spite and rage, force choking the commander of the base until Merrin manages to talk him down. Again, she soothes his fire. Unlike the Jedi teachings of old, love isn't a path to the dark side for Cal, it's a way to bring him back from it. But this is still a ferocious, angry, red moveset, and combined with the fact Cal's disguised as a member of the Empire while using it, might lead us to be concerned about the fact he's tapped into it. Right?
All three of us kind of just talked about it, the embrace the darkness mechanic, right? And my thought was when I got it and the game ended that they would have taken it away. Oh, they didn't take it away. Okay, well, I can switch it out. Oh, I can't switch it out. It's just there.
Yep.
So every time I use it, I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I'm taking the easy way out. And I think that's all deliberate. Yep. And I think that'll be a big part of where what could be Cal's story going forward.
Well, let's look at that while he burns through the bad guys. This isn't canon anymore, not since Disney got its claws all over the universe, but what you're seeing on screen right now is a force power called Force Judgment, where a Jedi can blast electricity from their hands just like Emperor Palpatine is known to do in the movies. In the Legends stories, Luke Skywalker did this, but the difference between Palpatine's use of lightning and Luke's is Force Judgment comes from righteous anger and a sense of justice, not cruelty. Luke's using the dark side isn't using him. He's walking a fine line. Jedi who explored the light and dark side of the Force were known as Grey Jedi, but that's a term that the Jedi Order actually bastardized through rumor mongering. Back in the days of the prequels, some even called Qui-Gon Jinn a Grey Jedi just because he distanced himself from the bureaucracy of the Jedi Council. The same goes for Ahsoka Tano, who completely segregates herself from the teaching of the Jedi Order, finding her own way. But the spiritual angle is more important than the political here, I think. The Force isn't binary. It's not goody force or baddie force. The light and dark sides are names given to variations of how a Jedi taps into them, all in the name of creating a dogmatic code for their religion. Cere, I think, is an example of a Jedi who is on the verge of becoming grey, but never fully bought into it. We hear her discussing how she can embrace the dark side of the Force, and replicating her moveset when Cal taps into Rage Mode seems to link her to the dark side. But she was still desperately trying to collect relics and tomes belonging to the Jedi to continue their teachings. Bode, I think, was a Grey Jedi in the most mechanical of senses. During the first portions of the game, he wasn't the obsessive consumed monster that we'll eventually see in his boss fight, but eventually that's what he will become. He'll leave behind the grey and become a dark Jedi. Not quite a Sith, because Sith Lords are normally focused on world domination. A dark Jedi is just someone who's self-obsessed. They don't care about the strangers and innocents of the galaxy. Only their family, their friends, their life matters. Bode wants Tanalorr all to himself, keeping it as a lost world for him and his daughter Kata. Because Cal embraces love and romance with Merrin, we're already seeing the grey burst out of him a little bit, but in his refusal to grieve, to sit with his feelings, he shows signs of being just like the stoic, cold figures of the Jedi Order that we saw back in the prequels. When he embraces the dark side and uses its strength and power to cut down his enemies, he takes one further step away from the light side, but his friends are able to bring him back to center. He hasn't quite stepped into the grey yet, but our new power-up reinforces that he's on a path to achieve that balance.
Sorry. You scared me. You must be Kata.
Deep in the base, Cal meets Bode's daughter, Kata. He's an intimidating presence, at first pulling out his lightsaber because he thinks Bode's about to attack. The whole scene is wrapped up in tension because of the forced politeness that Cal and Bode bring to it. Bode even introduces Cal as his best friend. Neither man wants bloodshed in front of his daughter. Bode's whole story is wrapped up in tragedy. Everything he told us about his family was true. The only difference was he was reeled in by the ISB. He reluctantly cut a deal to keep his daughter safe from the Inquisitors. Cal calls him a monster, still wallowing in his anger, unable to process it. Bode might have killed Cordova himself, but he also brought the Empire to Jeddah. He's the reason Cere's dead. No, Bode says. I'm a father. He gets away with the compass and sets off for Tanalorr, but all isn't lost. There's a very convenient second way for the team to get to the Lost World. If we align the various arrays we've activated across the game, the right pilot could fly straight to the nebula and get there. It's going to be risky, but thankfully Grease is up to the task, helped along by Cal's trusting in the Force and a little nudge from the beyond, courtesy of Cere. And so we make it to Tanalorr for the endgame. With Bode mere feet away, let me draw your attention back to this clip of Stig Asmussen on the IGN spoilercast.
It's, you've got Cal, you've got Bode, you've got Cere, and all these people are doing whatever it takes to survive. And Bode's got his own story, he's got his own motivations, but they're all in parallel with Cal as well too. So we thought that would be a good way of kind of like reflecting on Cal's journey and like how he made decisions differently, and he's still able to stay altruistic in the face of this, this incredible dark presence. So that's kind of something that we were always trying to play with the game, and learning that this guy's a Force user, not just a swashbuckler, very powerful, and somewhere along the way, in his obsession with kind of being the father, Bode literally loses the plot.
Watching Asmussen talk about Survivor's twist tells me that there was some conflict among the development team about how to treat Bode. None of the interviews say this outright, and hell, I don't even know if Stig and the Dump realize what they did. Bode is made so likable and so empathetic and so bloody tragic that it's hard to really hate him when our lightsabers clash. Clearly for the writers, that was the point, but when Stig talks so callously about Bode's character arc, how he literally lost the plot, how he becomes a monster by the endgame, I think he's describing a version of Survivor that isn't consistent with all of the brilliant build-up that comes before. Cal and Merrin are so full of anger at Bode that the only reason they decide not to run in guns blazing and foaming at the mouth is because of Kata. When they find her sitting outside the temple Dagan Gera built, they remember to treat her with kindness. Merrin completely takes her under her wing. Kata doesn't like Tanalorr. It's lonely, she says. Bode's whole plan is to isolate himself and his daughter far, far away, but is that any sort of life for either of them? The scene dressing for our final fight reflects how Cal spent the 5 years between games isolating himself from his friends. Bode just wants to hide here. He's not planning on staying a threat. His final form, the version of Bode that we battle on Tanalorr, is where the game doesn't find its balance. This battle should feel emotional as hell, but it's like the game can't decide if he's a tragic father fallen to fear and desperation, or a guy who, in Stig's words, lost the plot. This is a man who nervously rehearsed his big speech to Cal in an effort to avoid betrayal and bloodshed. Just look at the expression on his face when he resolves that he'll need to steal the compass and betray his friends. Now he's snarling like a wounded animal, foaming at the mouth, beast-like in his moveset, launching himself across the arena and attacking less strategically than we've known him to do. The essence of the Bode we knew is still on this battlefield. For example, he'll pull from various attacks that he deploys when he's a companion, but he's erratic to the point that he nearly blasts his daughter off the edge of the arena. Just take the music that plays. This boss theme is high energy, brooding, with long brassy notes to effectively translate how dangerous he is, but the context of this fight feels like it should be something more somber and tragic. I'm often reminded of Gwyn's boss theme from the end of Dark Souls, how a simple piano can wrap up the ruination of a civilization and the rotting of greatness in music that barely splinters the clanging of swords and pillars of lightning that we have to contend with. Something simpler, more delicate, would have reinforced how these are two best friends becoming the worst versions of themselves as the two people they care most about, Merrin and Kata, look on. Mechanically, it's a decent fight, but it tries to tread water between a spectacle and an emotional brawl. It doesn't come close to touching how cool the Dagengera fight was because nothing as insane as fighting on the ceiling happens, but it also keeps interrupting what ought to be nothing but the striking of our lightsabers with cutscenes and Night Sister portals. Difficulty-wise, he's a pushover until his final third. He's not the toughest boss in the game, Vader. He's not even the second toughest, Dagengera. Hell, I'd argue he's not even the third toughest, Ravis, meaning as far as player challenge goes, he ends up being a bit of a footnote in the overall game. The only thing he really brings to the table is his speed and the massive damage he does to our stagger meter while we do so little to his, but his moveset is predictable until the last 30%, and I think that 30% should have been his starting point. Where Survivor generally improves on Fallen Order's bosses, it's disappointing to see that Bode barely touches the second sister as a final confrontation. When the dust settles, Cal chooses to spare him, but Bode, having completely lost himself, force chokes Merrin. Everything comes down to a blaster, the tool he taught Cal how to use. Cal shoots him dead in front of his daughter. Not once, but twice. An unscripted acting choice by Cameron Monaghan.
When my mother died, it changed Papa. And me too, I guess.
Yes. But it does not have to define you. And you must not let it consume you.
I think there's a good chance that if we do get a third Jedi game that concludes this series as a trilogy, I'll grow to love Jedi Survivor's story and its ending because of how it will lead into the finale of Cal Kestis' tale. I'm wary that I've been so glowing of Survivor's design philosophy throughout and giving credit to the emotional weight its narrative carries just to rail against it at the end, and I don't want that to be the thing Survivor is remembered for here. For a lot of people, Bode's twist and boss fight landed with every ounce of impact Respawn hoped it would, but even as I finish up this video, I can't help but feel something is missing here. There's a big cliffhanger now rolling around regarding the fate of Kata and Cal's well-being. Cere's voice echoes through telling Cal to train Kata, but will she resent Cal for killing her father? Will Cal finally find peace post-trauma? Will the third game lead into Cal being a Jedi Master and Kata his Padawan? That, I think, would be the most satisfying direction the series could go in, as it would help solidify Cal's relationship with the Force and plant him as a grey Jedi through what he teaches Kata. Where Fallen Order ended with a hopeful look at a swashbuckling future, Survivor ends peacefully. A funeral for Cere, Cordova, and Bode. Cal finally stops. He finally mourns, and through mourning, he's defined by his pain, but he stops being consumed by it. It takes him all night. We see that he refuses to leave Cere's grave until the fires die, and well beyond that, he finally slows down. Throughout this video, I've popped up a handful of quotes from various reviews of The Empire Strikes Back written in 1980, 2 days before it was released in cinemas. I think they're so fascinating to look at 43 years later now that Star Wars is a household name and the quality of its modern stories fluctuates so wildly, because of the uncertainty of those reviews. Just like Survivor, Empire was part 2 of a trilogy in desperate need of a part 3 to give us an emotional climax. Nowadays, we look back on it and say it's the best Star Wars film, but in 1980, it left critics feeling unsure if it struck the right balance between swashbuckling adventure and a finely crafted emotional story. One of my favourite reviews came 17 years later, when Roger Ebert went back to the original trilogy knowing where all of this was going. Quote,
"The whole world of this story has been devised and constructed in such a way that we are not particularly aware of sets or effects. There's so much of this world that it all just seems seamless. It is because of the emotion stirred in Empire that the entire series takes on a mythic quality that resonates back to the first and ahead to the third. This is the heart."
If Jedi Survivor is Respawn's Empire, I can't help but have a renewed sense of elation, complicated by apprehension about what their Return of the Jedi will look like. Survivor almost strikes the right balance between its various mechanics with a fulfilling story, but yes, the bugs let it down, and its final act muddies those waters in a way Fallen Order never did. But I think that with time, and when we're able to reflect on Survivor as a part of Cal's story, the bugs will become a myth and Cal's struggles with the Force will be deepened. And even if those things don't happen, Survivor still stands as a damn fine adventure where you can see its heart beating forcefully and earnestly.
Guide her through the darkness.
If this is a sign of things to come, I can't wait to see where Cal goes next. Hey, thanks for watching. This is my last critique of the year, just one more video to go before we hit Christmas, and then it's full steam ahead into some massive projects in 2024. If you're new to the channel and like what you see, drop a like and help, maybe subscribe, it helps massively. On screen right now are my patrons, who get these videos early, ad-free and sponsor-free. They're the best and are the direct reason why I can try a couple more ambitious things next year, so order of thanks go to Major Simmer, Louis Almanza, Cariad1709, Shaldar, Mr. Mundus, Kyle Chamberlain, Carl, Vlad M, Greg, Eden Grace, Rocketman, Wild Weaver and Worm, Mitch Miller, Dialectograms, Matt Block, Roy, Alison Bates, Roman Brendel, Blake Foster, Michael Pearson, Sean Ryland, Anthony Santilli, Zelotath, Violet Dickinson, Hoss, Corey Alschuler, Daisy May, Forty, Dianian, Caleb Jablanicki, Ryan Williams, Nick T, Ben E, JMC147, Melvin Kitnick, Nicholas Chase, Siddhant Pandey, Jack Shepherd, Weston Pate, Crimson Fangs, A Lonely Cow, The Iron Giant, Crazy Kirsch, Oliver Bensrid, Testo Thompson, Trevor A. Elliott, Daniel Finnegan, Warren Blythe, Cherry Cheese, Luke Hughes, Noah Littrell, Woody Snail, Charlotte Rosewood, Full Metal Wolf, Sergs Fent, Rosie Rowland, Weather Waxing, Eunice Mikolai, Mr. Alienated, Lugoil, Funnyman1257, Nathan Mallory, Hurry Up Snufkin, Grim Ally, Vadim Orlov, Joe Pierce, Mr. Gusty, Nikolai Jorgensen, Damon, James Edney, Joe Smart, AJ, Morbid Carlson, Michael Weingarter, Atris Miller, Jubilation Chambers, Abram Partida, Abby, Chancellor Delamere, Ronald McRonald, Ray Mulryan, Murderous Lord, Evan Schrader, Dominus Knox, Mayday in Paradise, Oobly Doobly, Adam Harrison Fuller, Eric Evans, Andy Seco, Joe Humphreys, Caleb Gunter, Flare Dark Storm, Kamala Kuzovic, Paul Thomas, David Riata, Jerry Humes, Terticus Rex, Asmodeus, Joel Monty, Alec Meacham, Rect 3501, Lilac White, Chris Duran, Ginger Kappa, David Neal, Halton, Michael Smith, Mikolaj Kokot, Daniel Tarek, Clem, Prudvi Muva, Thomas Evans, Samantha P, Dapper Cyborg, Wub76, Technodan, When Goats Attack, Tenic, Mike Cripps, Meowners, Mad Gab, Rariter, Webby, Patrick Forsell, Nur Revel, Eve, Tyler Cox, Procrastinator, EP Horry, Unlucky Dragon, Gaming University, Yaya Schnitzel, Eddie Black, Abby the Bard, Elena Buck, Combat Wombat, Top Hat Tiger, Chase, Joel Jimenez, Wayward Flock, Larmed Larma, Fluffy the Demon, Destroyer of Worlds, Thomas Pruitt, Spalter, Danations, Christopher McBride, The Slayer of Games, Daniel Boyles, Shishki, Wandering Alpha, Vivi, Mija, Ridge Miedema, Captain Bon Clay, Alec Maxwell. I've been denied everything, even my cum. Captain Cabinet, Logan Hamilton, David Brynjarsson, Danger Zone, Chris McMullen, Chris McRae, Ryan Bryce, Ryan, Brenton, Matt Emmy, Matthew Halsey, Sean Toland, Jerome Hotchkiss, Prodigal Horse, Trenchcoat Guy, Cody, Kyle P. Feely, Garrett Birchall, Chachesvaz76, Jack, Neil Mack, Sam's Forge, Joey Isbell, Aurelia, Kristen Fenchel, Patrick Baird, LGX, Big Boar Wolf, Nicholas Chemin, Trevor Vernon, Joe Wilcox, Pleo, Blank Name, Leon, X Wrights, Shamax, Jonathan Riggs, Zachary Johnson, DNSCH, Monacari, Kieran Gresty, Lamar825, Iken, Tempe, Unicourt, David J. Morin, Minito, Callum Armitage, Christopher Tierney, Torstein Sundness, Fipsy, Luca, Tom Inns, Sammy Stuff, Alberto Calez, Type Raz, Zachary Powers, Andrew Muinos, Prospero, Alan Black, Callsign Nor, David Bedard, Jared Helfer, Mukor, John Foster Ag, Robert Capel, Paul W., Chief Sweep, Jonathan Lum, Rees, Pineapple Belongs on Pizza, Angry Optimist, Mr. Fredo Renton, Long Cheddar, Talkster, Ashley Broning, 100 Sams, My Friend Neil, Nathaniel Waters, Kyle Pearce, Kane Highwind, and Neve. Thank you all so much, and take care.